Have you ever wondered if there's more to the story of Cain and Abel than what we've been told? What if I revealed to you that the Bible contains hidden clues about other brothers, secret siblings, whose names were deliberately erased from the narrative we know so well? Brothers who walked the same earth, breathed the same air, yet their existence has been shrouded in mystery for thousands of years. Most people know the tragic tale of Cain and Abel, the world's first brothers whose story ended in humanity's first murder. But here's what will shock you. The biblical text itself suggests there were others, half-brothers, whose stories were intentionally obscured, whose bloodlines carried secrets that religious scholars have debated in whispered conversations for centuries. Before we dive deep into this mystery, hit that like button if you're ready to uncover truths that have been hidden in plain sight. And don't forget to subscribe, because what I'm about to reveal will challenge everything you thought you knew about the first family. Trust me, by the end of this investigation, you'll never read Genesis the same way again. Now let me warn you, this journey will take us through ancient texts, forgotten genealogies, and archaeological discoveries that paint a completely different picture of Adam and Eve's family tree. We're not just talking about a simple family story here. We're talking about a deliberate cover-up that spans millennia, involving names that were struck from records and bloodlines that were deemed too dangerous to remember. So buckle up, because we're about to expose Cain and Abel's secret half-brothers, and the truth is more explosive than you could ever imagine. The story begins where most people think it ends. Everyone knows Genesis chapter 4, right? Adam knew Eve. She conceived and bore Cain. Then she bore Abel. Simple family tree, case closed. But here's where it gets interesting. The Hebrew text contains linguistic anomalies that biblical scholars have puzzled over for generations. Words that don't quite fit, genealogical gaps that seem intentional, and most telling of all, population references that make absolutely no sense if only 4 people existed on Earth. Think about it logically. After Cain kills Abel, he's banished to wander the earth. But then, Genesis 4:17 drops this bombshell. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived. Wait, hold on. His wife? Where exactly did this wife come from if the only humans on earth were Adam, Eve, and now the murderous Cain? The text just casually mentions her existence as if she materialized out of thin air. But it gets stranger. Cain doesn't just find a wife. He builds a city. A city requires a population. You don't build infrastructure for 3 people. This suggests a thriving community, multiple families, a social structure that the traditional narrative completely fails to explain. Who were these people? Where did they come from? And why does the Bible seem to deliberately avoid giving us their names? Here's where the mystery deepens. When we examine the original Hebrew manuscripts, we discover something fascinating. The text uses specific linguistic markers that ancient scribes employed when they were intentionally omitting information. It's like reading a document where entire paragraphs have been redacted, except the redaction happened thousands of years ago. Ancient Jewish texts outside the canonical Bible, works like the Book of Jubilees and the Testament of Adam, contain references to additional sons of Adam whose names were systematically removed from the Genesis account. These weren't just casual omissions. This was deliberate editorial work carried out by scribes who had access to older, more complete records. But why would anyone want to hide the existence of these brothers? What made their stories so dangerous that they had to be erased from human memory? The answer lies in what these half-brothers represented and the bloodlines they carried forward into history. You see, these weren't just ordinary siblings. According to the suppressed texts, these half-brothers possessed knowledge that was considered too powerful for humanity to remember. They carried genetic markers, spiritual inheritances, and most importantly, they founded bloodlines that would challenge the entire structure of how we understand human origins. The first clue comes from studying ancient Mesopotamian records. Cuneiform tablets discovered in modern-day Iraq contain genealogical lists that predate the biblical accounts by centuries. These tablets reference multiple sons of the first man, sons whose descriptions match the hidden brothers referenced in the suppressed Hebrew texts. The correlation is too precise to be coincidental. But here's what's truly mind-blowing. Archaeological evidence from sites across the ancient Near East suggests that these half-brothers didn't just exist, they thrived. They established entire civilizations, developed technologies that wouldn't be reinvented for thousands of years, and left behind monuments that still baffle modern engineers. The Sumerian king lists, some of humanity's oldest written records, contain references to rulers whose lifespans and achievements mirror the descriptions of Adam's hidden sons. These weren't mythological figures. These were real people whose existence was systematically edited out of the biblical narrative, for reasons we're only beginning to understand. Now I know what you're thinking. If these brothers really existed, why isn't this common knowledge? Why aren't these discoveries being taught in schools or discussed in churches? The answer is both simpler and more complex than you might imagine. Religious institutions have a vested interest in maintaining the traditional narrative. The story of Cain and Abel serves specific theological purposes that would be undermined by acknowledging the existence of other brothers. But more than that, the true story of these half-brothers raises questions about human origins that challenge not just religious doctrine, but our entire understanding of ancient history. Think about the implications. If Adam and Eve had multiple sons who founded separate civilizations, then human development wasn't the linear progression we've been taught. Instead, it was a complex web of competing bloodlines, each carrying different aspects of primordial knowledge and power. The archaeological evidence is overwhelming once you know where to look. Megalithic structures across the globe show signs of construction techniques that align with the technologies attributed to these hidden brothers. Stone-cutting methods that we can barely replicate today, astronomical alignments that demonstrate advanced mathematical knowledge, and most intriguingly, genetic markers in modern populations that suggest multiple founding lineages rather than a single human origin point. But the most compelling evidence comes from the linguistic analysis of ancient texts. When you strip away the editorial layers added by later scribes, the original Hebrew contains references to sons whose names have been deliberately obscured. The grammatical structures are there, the genealogical frameworks remain intact, but the specific identities have been carefully removed. It's like finding a family photograph where certain faces have been methodically cut out. You can see the outline of where they stood. You can infer their presence from the positioning of others, but their actual features have been erased. That's exactly what happened to the records of these half-brothers. The question becomes, who had the power and motivation to carry out such a comprehensive cover-up? Who could coordinate the editing of texts across multiple cultures and time periods? And most importantly, what were they trying to hide? The answer lies in understanding that these weren't just ordinary siblings competing for their father's attention. These half-brothers represented something far more significant. They were the carriers of specific genetic and spiritual inheritances that would shape the entire future of human civilization. According to the fragments that survive in various ancient sources, each of these brothers received different aspects of primordial knowledge from their father Adam. One inherited mastery over metallurgy and craftsmanship. Another received understanding of astronomical cycles and calendar systems. A third was granted knowledge of agriculture and animal husbandry that went far beyond anything we see in the traditional biblical narrative. But here's where it gets really interesting. These weren't just practical skills. Each brother also carried specific spiritual authorities, different aspects of the divine image that had been placed in Adam. When they were scattered across the earth, they took these authorities with them, establishing bloodlines that would carry forward different elements of humanity's original purpose. This explains so much about the archaeological record that mainstream history struggles to account for. The sudden appearance of advanced civilizations with no apparent developmental period. The spread of similar technologies across geographically isolated regions. The persistence of shared mythological themes in cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. These phenomena make perfect sense when you understand that multiple brothers, each carrying different aspects of advanced knowledge, spread out across the earth and established separate civilizations. They weren't starting from scratch. They were implementing technologies and organizational systems they had inherited from their father. But if this is true, if these half-brothers really existed and founded separate lineages, then why was their existence hidden? What made their story so dangerous that it had to be erased from human memory? The answer brings us to one of the most controversial aspects of this entire investigation. These brothers didn't just carry knowledge and authority. They carried something else, something that made their bloodlines a threat to the established order that would emerge in later centuries. They carried the potential for humanity to remember its true origins and reclaim its original purpose. And that, my friends, was something that certain powers could not allow to happen. The bloodlines of these hidden brothers carried more than just genetic material. They carried memories, collective memories of a time when humanity operated at a completely different level of consciousness and capability. Memories that, if preserved, would have fundamentally altered how future generations understood their place in the world. You see, Adam wasn't just the first man. According to the suppressed texts, he was a being who possessed capabilities that we can barely comprehend today. He had direct communication with the divine realm, understanding of natural laws that we're only beginning to rediscover, and most importantly, he had the ability to pass these gifts to his offspring in varying degrees. Each of his sons inherited different aspects of this primordial inheritance. But here's the crucial detail that changes everything. They didn't all inherit the same moral framework. While Cain and Abel's story focuses on the fundamental choice between good and evil, these other brothers represented something far more complex. They inherited power without necessarily inheriting wisdom, knowledge without moral restraint, capability without divine guidance. This created a situation that threatened the entire spiritual development of humanity. Imagine bloodlines spreading across the earth, each carrying fragments of godlike power, but without the moral foundation necessary to use that power responsibly. Some of these brothers used their inheritance to build magnificent civilizations. Others used it for purposes that were far darker. The archaeological evidence supports this interpretation in ways that will blow your mind. Megalithic sites across the globe show clear evidence of two distinct construction methodologies. One set of sites demonstrates careful planning, harmonious integration with natural systems, and clear evidence of benevolent purpose. These align with the descriptions of the righteous brothers mentioned in the hidden texts. But there's another category of ancient sites that tells a very different story. Structures that show evidence of massive human sacrifice, technologies that seem designed for control rather than advancement, and most disturbing of all, genetic evidence that suggests deliberate manipulation of human bloodlines for unknown purposes. These sites aren't randomly distributed. They follow specific geographical patterns that align perfectly with the territorial divisions described in the suppressed genealogies. It's as if each brother claimed a specific region of the earth and developed it according to their particular inheritance and moral orientation. Now here's where this gets personal for every single one of us watching this video. These bloodlines didn't just disappear. They continued forward through history, mixing and intermingling, but never completely losing their distinct characteristics. Modern genetic studies have identified population clusters that carry markers suggesting multiple founding lineages, exactly what we would expect if these brothers really existed. But more than that, the spiritual and psychological characteristics associated with these different bloodlines can still be traced in modern populations. Certain groups show unusual aptitudes for specific technologies. Others demonstrate natural inclinations toward particular forms of spiritual practice. Still others carry what can only be described as an inherited memory of ancient knowledge systems. This isn't about racial superiority or genetic determinism. This is about understanding that humanity's spiritual and intellectual diversity stems from a much more complex origin than we've been taught. We're not all descended from a single line of development. We're the inheritors of multiple streams of consciousness and capability that were scattered across the earth in humanity's earliest days. The implications are staggering. If these bloodlines really exist, if they really carry distinct spiritual inheritances, then human potential is far greater than we've been led to believe. But it also means that the conflicts we see playing out in modern times may have roots that go back to the very beginning of human history. Think about the persistent patterns of conflict between different civilizations throughout history. The recurring themes of technological advancement followed by moral collapse. The way certain bloodlines seem to carry forward specific forms of knowledge or spiritual practice across millennia, despite geographical separation. These patterns make perfect sense when you understand that they're not random historical developments. They're the playing out of spiritual dynamics that were set in motion when these brothers first scattered across the earth with their different inheritances. But here's what's truly fascinating. The hidden texts don't just describe these brothers as historical figures. They describe them as carrying forward different aspects of a cosmic conflict that began before human history even started. Each brother represents a different response to the fundamental questions of existence. How should power be used? What is humanity's relationship to the divine? What is our responsibility to each other and to the earth itself? Cain and Abel's story gives us the simplified version. Good versus evil, sacrifice versus selfishness, obedience versus rebellion. But the stories of the hidden brothers reveal that the reality was far more nuanced. There were brothers who chose paths that were neither purely righteous nor completely evil. Brothers who used their inheritance to build great civilizations but with mixed motives. Brothers who preserved important knowledge but used it for purposes that were morally ambiguous. This complexity explains why their stories were eventually suppressed. The simple narrative of Cain and Abel serves clear theological purposes. It establishes fundamental moral principles and demonstrates the consequences of choosing evil over good. But the stories of the other brothers introduce moral complexity that challenges easy categorization. Religious authorities throughout history have preferred clear-cut narratives that support specific doctrinal positions. The existence of brothers who didn't fit neatly into categories of righteous or wicked complicated the theological framework that was being established, so their stories were gradually edited out, their names were removed, and their contributions to human development were attributed to other sources. But the evidence of their existence couldn't be completely erased. It shows up in archaeological sites that don't fit conventional timelines. It appears in genetic studies that reveal multiple founding populations. It emerges in mythological traditions from cultures across the globe that share suspiciously similar details despite having no apparent historical contact. Most significantly, it manifests in the persistent human sense that we're capable of far more than our current civilization demonstrates. That feeling that we've lost something important, that our ancestors possess knowledge and capabilities that we're still trying to rediscover. That intuition isn't just nostalgic romanticism, it's genetic memory of what these hidden bloodlines once carried. Now, you might be wondering how this information has remained hidden for so long, if the evidence is as compelling as I'm suggesting. The answer lies in understanding how information control works across long periods of time. You don't need a single conspiracy orchestrated by one group. You just need consistent incentives that reward certain narratives and discourage others. Religious institutions have theological reasons to maintain the simplified version of early human history. Academic institutions have professional reasons to avoid theories that challenge established timelines and methodologies. Archaeological organizations have funding reasons to focus on discoveries that fit within accepted frameworks, rather than pursuing evidence that might overturn decades of established scholarship. Each group has legitimate reasons for maintaining the status quo, but the cumulative effect is that alternative interpretations of the evidence are systematically discouraged or ignored. It's not that scholars are deliberately hiding the truth, it's that the institutional structures they work within create powerful incentives to avoid pursuing certain lines of investigation, but those incentives are starting to break down. Modern technology is making it harder to suppress evidence that doesn't fit conventional narratives. Genetic analysis is revealing population patterns that demand new explanations. Archaeological techniques are uncovering sites and artifacts that challenge established timelines. Most importantly, information sharing through platforms like this one is making it possible to connect pieces of evidence that were previously isolated in different academic disciplines. The story of Cain and Abel's hidden half-brothers is emerging not because of any single dramatic discovery, but because the accumulated weight of evidence from multiple fields is reaching a tipping point where the conventional narrative can no longer adequately explain what we're finding. And here's what makes this particularly relevant for us today. If these bloodlines really exist, if they really carry distinct spiritual and intellectual inheritances, then understanding them becomes crucial for understanding our own potential and purpose. We're not just random evolutionary accidents struggling to survive in a meaningless universe. We're the inheritors of specific gifts and responsibilities that were distributed among humanity's founding families. The question becomes, which inheritance did you receive? What aspects of primordial knowledge and authority are encoded in your particular bloodline? And most importantly, how are you supposed to use those gifts in service of humanity's ultimate purpose? These aren't just academic questions. They're deeply personal questions that go to the heart of why you're here and what you're supposed to accomplish with your life. The answers lie not just in understanding the historical evidence, but in recognizing the spiritual dynamics that are still playing out through these ancient bloodlines. Because here's the truth that will change everything once you really grasp it. The conflict that began with these hidden brothers never ended. It's still happening today, playing out through their descendants, through the institutions and civilizations they established, through the knowledge systems and spiritual practices they preserved. You're not just watching this story unfold from the outside, you're part of it. Your bloodline, your spiritual inheritance, your natural aptitudes and inclinations, all of these connect you to one or more of these ancient streams of human development. Understanding which stream you're connected to becomes the key to understanding your role in the cosmic drama that's still unfolding. But before we can explore that connection, we need to dig deeper into exactly who these brothers were, what they accomplished, and why their existence became so threatening that it had to be hidden from human memory. Because the more you understand about them, the more you'll understand about yourself and the incredible potential that lies dormant in your own genetic and spiritual inheritance. The first of these hidden brothers was known by a name that has been systematically erased from every major text, but fragments survive in the most ancient sources. Let's call him Azrael, though that's not his original name. The linguistic evidence suggests his true name contained elements that referenced both fire and earth, indicating his specific inheritance involved mastery over metallurgy and geological processes. Archaeological sites across ancient Mesopotamia bear his fingerprints. Copper smelting operations that predate conventional timelines by thousands of years. Bronze working techniques that demonstrate understanding of alloy compositions we didn't officially rediscover until the Industrial Age. Most remarkably, evidence of steel production in regions where iron ore deposits would have required mining technologies that shouldn't have existed. But Azrael's inheritance went beyond simple metalworking. The suppressed texts describe him as carrying knowledge of what they call the deep fires, the geological processes that shape continents and move mountains. Megalithic sites attributed to his bloodline show evidence of stone-cutting techniques that utilize natural fracture patterns in ways that suggest intimate understanding of crystalline structures and tectonic forces. Here's what's fascinating about these sites. They're not just impressive examples of ancient engineering. They're positioned at specific geographical locations that form geometric patterns across vast distances. When you map these locations, they align with underground mineral deposits, geothermal activity, and tectonic stress points in ways that demonstrate knowledge of Earth's internal dynamics that we're only beginning to understand today. The implications are staggering. This wasn't primitive technology stumbling toward advancement through trial and error. This was sophisticated geological science being applied on a continental scale. Azrael's bloodline didn't just work with metals and stones. They understood the living systems of the planet itself. But power without wisdom creates problems that echo through millennia. While Azrael's technological contributions advanced human civilization in measurable ways, the texts suggest his moral development didn't keep pace with his capabilities. His bloodline became associated with environmental exploitation, territorial conquest, and the development of weapons technologies that were used for dominance rather than protection. This pattern repeats throughout history in ways that are almost too obvious once you know what to look for. Civilizations that demonstrate sudden technological leaps, followed by periods of warfare and environmental degradation. Industrial developments that seem to emerge fully formed without apparent developmental stages. The persistent association between metallurgical advancement and military conquest across cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. The second brother presents an even more complex picture. The fragments refer to him through titles rather than names, but the most consistent designation translates roughly as the Star Walker. His inheritance involved understanding of celestial mechanics, calendar systems, and what the texts describe as the pathways between worlds. Now, before you dismiss this as primitive astronomy mixed with superstition, consider the archaeological evidence. Stone circles and astronomical observatories across the globe demonstrate mathematical precision that rivals modern calculations. Alignments with stellar positions that account for precession cycles spanning thousands of years. Calendar systems that track multiple celestial cycles simultaneously with accuracy that wasn't officially achieved until the development of atomic clocks. But the Starwalker's knowledge went beyond simple observation of celestial movements. The suppressed texts describe him as understanding what they called the celestial doors, specific times and locations where communication with non-physical realms became possible. This wasn't mystical speculation. This was systematic knowledge of consciousness technologies that allowed expanded awareness and direct communication with intelligences beyond normal human perception. Archaeological sites associated with his bloodline consistently show evidence of acoustic engineering designed to alter human consciousness. Stone chambers with resonance frequencies that induce specific brainwave states. Geometric layouts that create electromagnetic field patterns affecting neural activity. Most intriguingly, evidence of substances and techniques that enhanced psychic perception and remote viewing capabilities. The Starwalker's descendants became the pre-scientists of the ancient world. They established observatory complexes that served simultaneously as educational institutions, consciousness research facilities, and communication centers for coordinating activities across vast geographical distances. They developed navigation techniques that allowed precise travel across oceans, centuries before such capabilities were officially discovered. But their knowledge came with temptations that proved difficult to resist. The ability to communicate with non-physical intelligences opened doorways to entities that weren't necessarily benevolent. The consciousness technologies that expanded awareness also provided opportunities for mental domination and psychological control. The astronomical knowledge that enabled navigation also facilitated the coordination of conquest and exploitation. Historical records show recurring patterns of priest-king dynasties that combined advanced scientific knowledge with authoritarian control systems. Civilizations that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of natural laws, while simultaneously practicing human sacrifice and social oppression. The persistent association between astronomical knowledge and claims of divine authority that justified extreme concentrations of power. The third brother's story reveals perhaps the most tragic aspect of this entire narrative. The texts refer to him as the life keeper, and his inheritance involved understanding of biological processes, agricultural systems, and what they described as the breath that moves through all living things. His bloodline developed agricultural techniques that produced yields far exceeding anything achieved through conventional farming methods. They understood soil chemistry, plant genetics, and ecosystem management in ways that created abundance without environmental degradation. Most remarkably, they possessed knowledge of human biology that enabled healing techniques and life extension methods that seem almost magical by current standards. Archaeological evidence of their settlements shows sophisticated water management systems, terraced agriculture that worked with natural topography rather than against it, and botanical gardens that preserved genetic diversity across thousands of plant species. These weren't primitive farming communities struggling for survival. These were highly advanced ecological civilizations that had achieved sustainable abundance. But the life keeper's inheritance included understanding of biological processes that could be used for destruction as well as creation. The same knowledge that enabled healing could be applied to create diseases. The agricultural techniques that produced abundance could be modified to create famines. The understanding of human biology that extended life could be perverted to cause suffering and death. Historical patterns show recurring incidents of biological warfare that shouldn't have been possible given the supposed technological limitations of ancient civilizations, plagues that targeted specific population groups while leaving others unaffected, agricultural failures that devastated entire regions with suspicious precision. Most disturbing, evidence of deliberate genetic manipulation designed to create physical and mental limitations in conquered populations. The Lifekeeper's bloodline became associated with both the greatest healers and the most sophisticated poisoners in human history. They established medical traditions that preserved healing knowledge across millennia, but they also developed biological weapons that were used for genocide and population control. The same understanding that could extend human life was perverted to create dependencies and weaknesses that could be exploited for political control. Now here's where this gets personal for everyone watching this investigation. These three brothers represent just the beginning of a much larger pattern. The suppressed texts reference at least 7 additional sons of Adam, each carrying different aspects of primordial inheritance, each establishing bloodlines that shaped human development in specific ways. One brother inherited mastery over sound and vibration, developing technologies that could move massive stones, alter human consciousness, and communicate across vast distances. His bloodline established the acoustic engineering traditions that created monuments we still can't fully explain, and musical systems that induced specific psychological and spiritual states. Another inherited understanding of light and electromagnetic phenomena, developing what the texts describe as fire that doesn't burn and light that reveals hidden things. His descendants became associated with optical technologies, electromagnetic healing methods, and communication systems that transmitted information through light-based signals. A 6th brother received knowledge of water and fluid dynamics, understanding the circulation systems that move through earth and atmosphere. His bloodline developed hydrological engineering that controlled weather patterns, transportation systems that utilized ocean and air currents, and healing methods based on the fluid systems within human bodies. The 7th brother's inheritance involved what the texts call the binding forces, the energies that hold matter together and connect all things across space and time. His descendants understood gravitational manipulation, structural engineering that defied conventional physics, and consciousness technologies that enabled direct mental communication across any distance. Each of these bloodlines contributed specific capabilities to human development, but each also carried the potential for those capabilities to be misused. The pattern repeats across every inherited gift. Knowledge that could heal could also harm. Technologies that could liberate could also enslave. Understanding that could enlighten could also deceive. This explains the fundamental instability that has characterized human civilization throughout recorded history. We're not dealing with a single species developing in a linear progression from primitive to advanced. We're dealing with multiple bloodlines, each carrying fragments of advanced knowledge, competing and cooperating in complex patterns that reflect the moral choices made by their founding fathers. The archaeological record makes perfect sense once you understand this framework. Sudden appearances of advanced technologies followed by periods of decline and loss. Civilizations that demonstrated sophisticated understanding in some areas while remaining primitive in others. The persistent pattern of knowledge being preserved in secret traditions while being lost to mainstream culture. But here's what changes everything about how we understand our current situation. These bloodlines didn't disappear. They continued forward through history, sometimes mixing, sometimes remaining distinct, but always carrying forward their specific inheritances. Modern genetic studies are beginning to identify population clusters that show exactly the kind of diversity we would expect if humanity really descended from multiple founding lines rather than a single ancestral population. More importantly, the spiritual and psychological characteristics associated with these different inheritances can still be recognized in modern populations. Certain family lines show unusual aptitudes for specific technologies that seem to emerge without conventional training. Others demonstrate natural inclinations toward particular forms of healing or spiritual practice that appear to be inherited rather than learned. This isn't about genetic determinism or claims of superiority. This is about recognizing that human potential is far more diverse and powerful than we've been taught to believe. Each bloodline carries specific gifts that were intended to contribute to humanity's collective development. The problem arose when these gifts were used for individual advantage rather than common benefit. Understanding which bloodline characteristics you carry becomes crucial for understanding your own purpose and potential. Are you naturally drawn to working with earth and minerals? Do you find yourself understanding technological systems intuitively? Do you have unusual sensitivity to natural cycles and biological processes? These aren't random personality traits. They're expressions of inherited capabilities that connect you to one or more of these ancient streams of human development. But recognizing your inheritance is only the first step. The crucial question becomes how you choose to use those inherited gifts. Will you follow the pattern of your bloodline's historical development? Or will you break the cycle by choosing wisdom over power, service over dominance, cooperation over competition? Because here's the secret that the suppressed texts ultimately reveal. The scattering of these brothers and their different inheritances wasn't a punishment or an accident. It was preparation for a future time when humanity would need to reclaim and integrate all of these scattered gifts to fulfill its ultimate purpose. That time is now. The challenges facing our species require capabilities that no single bloodline possesses in isolation. We need the technological mastery of Azrael's line, but guided by wisdom rather than greed. We need the consciousness technologies of the Star Walker's descendants, but applied for healing rather than control. We need the biological understanding of the Lifekeeper's bloodline, but used for regeneration rather than destruction. The integration of these scattered inheritances isn't happening through genetic mixing alone. It's happening through individuals who choose to transcend the limitations and corruptions that have characterized their bloodlines throughout history. People who recognize their inherited gifts, but refuse to use them for selfish purposes. Individuals who understand that their capabilities were never meant for personal advancement, but for serving humanity's collective evolution. This is why the story of these hidden brothers matters for you personally. You're not just a random individual trying to figure out your purpose in life. You're the inheritor of specific gifts and responsibilities that were distributed among humanity's founding families. Your natural aptitudes, your unexplained interests, your intuitive understanding of certain systems or processes, all of these connect you to ancient streams of knowledge and capability. But you're also inheriting the moral choices made by your bloodline throughout history. The patterns of how those gifts were used, the corruptions that crept in, the limitations that were accepted, all of these influence the spiritual and psychological environment you're operating within. The question becomes whether you'll perpetuate those historical patterns or break free from them by choosing a different path, whether you'll use your inherited capabilities for personal gain or for serving something greater than yourself, whether you'll allow fear and competition to guide your choices or step into the courage and cooperation that your gifts were originally intended to express. Because the ultimate secret hidden in these suppressed texts isn't just that humanity has multiple bloodlines with different capabilities. It's that these bloodlines were always intended to work together, each contributing their specific gifts to create something far greater than any individual inheritance could achieve alone. The separation happened because of moral failure, not divine design. The competition and conflict between bloodlines emerged from fear and pride, not from natural necessity. The hiding of this history occurred because integrated humanity would be too powerful for existing control systems to manage. But the time for separation is ending. The challenges we face as a species require the integration of all inherited capabilities. Climate change demands both technological innovation and biological understanding. Social evolution requires both consciousness technologies and practical wisdom. Spiritual development needs both scientific knowledge and intuitive perception. You're living at the exact moment in history when these scattered inheritances are beginning to reunite. Not through force or conquest, but through individuals who choose to embody the highest potential of their bloodline while cooperating with others who carry different gifts. This is your invitation to step into that role, to recognize your inherited capabilities, understand their historical development, acknowledge their potential for both creation and destruction, and choose to use them in service of humanity's collective awakening. The hidden brothers whose stories were suppressed weren't just historical figures. They were archetypes of human potential that continue to express through their descendants. You carry one or more of those archetypal patterns within your consciousness and capabilities. The question is whether you'll allow those patterns to express through you unconsciously, repeating historical cycles of advancement and corruption, or whether you'll take conscious responsibility for how those inherited gifts manifest through your life and choices. Because that choice doesn't just affect you personally, it affects the entire trajectory of human development. Every individual who chooses wisdom over power, cooperation over competition, service over selfishness, contributes to the healing of their bloodline and the integration of humanity's scattered gifts. The story of Cain and Abel's hidden half-brothers isn't ancient history. It's the story that's still being written through your life and the lives of everyone around you. Understanding that story becomes the key to understanding your role in humanity's ultimate destiny. But first, we need to explore exactly how these bloodlines have expressed throughout recorded history, which civilizations they established, and how their influence continues to shape our world today. Because once you see those patterns, you'll never look at current events the same way again. The bloodlines didn't just scatter randomly across the ancient world. They followed specific migration patterns that can still be traced today through a combination of genetic markers, archaeological evidence, and linguistic analysis. What emerges is a picture of coordinated expansion that suggests these brothers weren't just wandering nomads seeking new territory. They were implementing a deliberate strategy to establish influence across every major region of the inhabited Earth. The first major settlement pattern emerges in what we now call the Fertile Crescent, but extends far beyond the traditional boundaries most people associate with early civilization. Azrael's metallurgical bloodline established a network of mining and smelting operations that stretched from the mountains of Armenia down through the Zagros Range and into the mineral-rich regions of what is now Afghanistan. These weren't isolated outposts. They were connected by sophisticated trade routes and communication systems that enabled coordination across thousands of miles. Archaeological surveys of these regions reveal something extraordinary. The mining operations show evidence of extraction techniques that maximized yield while minimizing environmental impact. Smelting facilities that utilized geothermal energy sources in ways that wouldn't be rediscovered until modern times. Most remarkably, evidence of quality control systems that maintained consistent alloy compositions across production sites separated by vast distances. This level of coordination requires more than just technical knowledge. It demonstrates organizational capabilities and communication technologies that challenge everything we think we know about the limitations of ancient civilizations. How do you maintain consistent production standards across a network spanning thousands of miles without modern transportation and communication systems? The answer lies in understanding that these bloodlines inherited more than just technical skills. They inherited organizational consciousness that enabled them to think and operate on scales that seem impossible by conventional standards. They weren't just individuals with special knowledge. They were carriers of collective intelligence that allowed coordinated action across space and time in ways that modern management theory is only beginning to understand. But this coordination came at a cost that becomes evident when you examine the social structures that emerged around these early industrial operations. The mining communities show clear evidence of hierarchical organization, with extreme disparities between the technical elite and the labor force. Living quarters that demonstrate vast differences in lifestyle and opportunity. Most disturbing, evidence of what can only be described as systematic exploitation of human resources for industrial production. The Star Walker's astronomical bloodline followed a different expansion pattern, but one that reveals equally sophisticated strategic thinking. Rather than establishing industrial networks, they created a constellation of observatory complexes positioned at locations that enabled precise mapping of celestial movements across the entire known world. These sites weren't just built for local observation. They were components of a global system designed to track astronomical cycles with unprecedented accuracy. The mathematical precision required for this coordination is staggering. Each observatory had to be positioned not just for optimal viewing of celestial events, but in relationship to all the other sites in the network. The calculations required to achieve this level of coordination wouldn't be possible without understanding of spherical geometry, precession cycles, and gravitational effects that weren't officially discovered until centuries later. But the Star Walker's network served purposes beyond astronomical observation. These sites show evidence of communication technologies that utilized electromagnetic phenomena in ways that enabled real-time coordination across continental distances. Crystalline structures that could generate and focus electromagnetic fields. Acoustic chambers that could amplify and direct sound waves across vast distances. Most intriguingly, consciousness technologies that enable direct mental communication between trained operators at different locations. The implications are mind-bending. While conventional history tells us that long-distance communication was impossible, until the development of modern technology, the archaeological evidence suggests that the Star Walker's bloodline maintained instantaneous communication across their entire global network. They weren't just observing the stars, they were using astronomical knowledge to coordinate activities across the inhabited Earth in real time. But this capability created temptations that proved difficult to resist. The same technologies that enabled coordination could be used for surveillance and control. The consciousness techniques that allowed communication could be perverted to manipulate thoughts and emotions. The astronomical knowledge that revealed natural cycles could be used to predict and exploit social and political developments. Evidence emerges throughout ancient history of priest-king dynasties that combined advanced scientific knowledge with authoritarian control systems. civilizations that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of natural laws, while maintaining rigid social hierarchies that concentrated power in the hands of technical elites. The persistent pattern of astronomical knowledge being used to justify claims of divine authority and social control. The Lifekeepers' agricultural bloodline established settlements that followed river systems and fertile valleys. But their expansion pattern reveals understanding of ecological relationships that extended far beyond simple farming techniques. They created agricultural networks that managed water resources, soil fertility, and genetic diversity across entire continental watersheds. These weren't isolated farming communities. They were components of integrated ecological systems designed to maximize biological productivity while maintaining environmental stability. Archaeological evidence from these settlements shows agricultural techniques that produce yields far exceeding anything achieved through conventional methods. Soil management systems that actually improve fertility over time rather than depleting it. Crop rotation patterns that maintain genetic diversity while maximizing nutritional value. Most remarkably, evidence of deliberate ecosystem engineering that enhanced the productivity of entire bioregions. But the Lifekeepers' knowledge extended beyond agriculture into areas that modern science is only beginning to explore. Evidence of biological technologies that could enhance human physical and mental capabilities. Healing techniques that addressed not just symptoms, but underlying genetic and energetic imbalances. Most significantly, understanding of human reproduction that enabled selective enhancement of desired traits across multiple generations. This knowledge created possibilities that proved irresistible to those who inherited it. The same biological understanding that could heal could be used to create diseases. The agricultural techniques that produced abundance could be modified to create dependencies and control food supplies. The genetic knowledge that could enhance human capabilities could be perverted to create limitations and weaknesses in subject populations. Historical patterns show recurring incidents of biological warfare that shouldn't have been possible given the supposed technological limitations of ancient civilizations, plagues that affected specific populations while leaving others untouched, agricultural failures that devastated enemy territories with suspicious precision. Most disturbing, evidence of deliberate genetic manipulation designed to create physical and mental characteristics that served the interests of ruling elites. Now here's where this historical analysis becomes directly relevant to understanding our current global situation. The settlement patterns established by these ancient bloodlines correspond remarkably closely to the centers of power and influence that continue to shape world events today. The regions where Azrael's industrial networks were established remain centers of mining, manufacturing, and technological development. The locations of the Starwalkers observatory complexes continue to be associated with centers of learning, communication, and information control. The territories developed by the Lifekeepers' agricultural bloodline remain the primary food-producing regions that feed global populations. This isn't coincidence. These locations were chosen for specific geological, astronomical, and biological advantages that remain relevant regardless of technological development. But more than that, the organizational consciousness and strategic thinking patterns established by these original bloodlines continue to influence how power and resources are managed in these regions. Modern genetic studies are beginning to reveal population clusters that show exactly the diversity patterns we would expect if these bloodlines really continued forward through history. Certain regions show genetic markers suggesting multiple founding populations rather than single ancestral groups. Other areas demonstrate population characteristics that align with the specific capabilities attributed to particular bloodlines in the ancient texts. But the most compelling evidence comes from studying the persistent cultural and psychological patterns that characterize different regions and populations. Areas associated with Azrael's bloodline continue to show unusual aptitude for technological innovation combined with tendencies toward environmental exploitation and social hierarchy. Regions connected to the Starwalkers' lineage demonstrate advanced understanding of information systems, alongside patterns of intellectual elitism and social control. Territories linked to the Lifekeeper's inheritance show sophisticated biological and agricultural knowledge combined with recurring incidents of population manipulation and biological warfare. These patterns persist across millennia despite massive cultural changes, political upheavals, and population movements. They suggest that something deeper than learned cultural traditions is being transmitted through these bloodlines. Something that influences not just individual capabilities, but collective consciousness and social organization patterns. This brings us to one of the most controversial aspects of this entire investigation. If these bloodlines really carry distinct inheritances that influence both individual capabilities and collective behavior patterns, then understanding them becomes crucial for understanding the hidden dynamics that shape world events. Consider the persistent patterns of conflict between different civilizations throughout history. The recurring themes of technological advancement, followed by moral collapse. The way certain regions seem to specialize in particular forms of knowledge or social organization despite geographical and cultural isolation. These patterns make perfect sense when you understand that they reflect the playing out of spiritual dynamics that were established when these brothers first scattered across the earth. But here's what makes this particularly relevant for understanding current events. The technological capabilities that were once distributed among separate bloodlines are now becoming accessible to individuals, regardless of their genetic inheritance. Digital technology is democratizing access to information and communication systems that were once the exclusive domain of the Starwalker's lineage. Industrial automation is making manufacturing capabilities available that were once limited to Azrael's bloodline. Biotechnology is providing tools for biological manipulation that were once restricted to the Lifekeeper's descendants. This democratization of inherited capabilities is creating opportunities that haven't existed since the original scattering of these bloodlines. For the first time in human history, individuals from any genetic background can potentially access and integrate the full spectrum of capabilities that were once distributed among separate lineages. But it's also creating dangers that mirror the original moral failures that led to the suppression of this history. The same technologies that could liberate human potential are being used for surveillance and control. The biological tools that could enhance human capabilities are being perverted for population manipulation and genetic warfare. The communication systems that could enable global cooperation are being exploited for information control and psychological manipulation. The choice facing our generation is whether we'll repeat the historical patterns of advancement followed by corruption, or whether we'll learn from the mistakes of these ancient bloodlines and choose a different path. Whether we'll use these democratized capabilities for individual advantage or for serving humanity's collective evolution. This choice isn't just theoretical. It's playing out right now through the decisions being made by individuals, corporations, and governments around the world. Every choice to use technology for empowerment rather than control contributes to breaking the historical cycles. Every decision to share knowledge rather than hoard it helps heal the separations that have divided humanity for millennia. But making these choices requires understanding the deeper dynamics at work. You can't break free from historical patterns if you don't understand how those patterns were established and what forces continue to perpetuate them. You can't choose a different path if you don't recognize the inherited tendencies that influence your thinking and decision-making processes. This is why understanding your own bloodline inheritance becomes so important. Not because it determines your destiny, but because it helps you recognize the unconscious patterns that might otherwise control your choices. Once you understand which ancient stream of consciousness you're connected to, you can choose to express the highest potential of that inheritance while avoiding the historical corruptions that have limited its expression. Are you naturally drawn to working with technology and systems? You might be carrying forward aspects of Azrael's inheritance but you can choose to use those capabilities for creation rather than exploitation. Do you find yourself understanding information patterns and communication systems intuitively? You could be connected to the Star Walker's lineage, but you can choose to use those gifts for education rather than manipulation. Are you sensitive to biological processes and natural cycles? You might be inheriting from the Life Keeper's bloodline, but you can choose to apply that understanding for healing rather than control. The key is recognizing that inheritance creates opportunity, not obligation. You're not bound to repeat the mistakes of your bloodline's history. You can choose to embody the original purpose for which those capabilities were given, while learning from the failures that led to their corruption. But individual choice alone isn't sufficient to break these ancient patterns. The original design required cooperation between bloodlines, each contributing their specific gifts to create something greater than any individual inheritance could achieve. That cooperation was broken by fear, pride, and the desire for dominance. Healing that break requires choosing collaboration over competition, integration over separation, service over self-interest. This healing is already beginning to happen through individuals who recognize their inherited gifts, but refuse to use them for selfish purposes. People who understand that their capabilities were never meant for personal advancement, but for serving humanity's collective evolution. Communities that are learning to integrate different forms of knowledge and consciousness in ways that transcend the limitations of any single tradition or bloodline. The story of these hidden brothers isn't just ancient history. It's the template for understanding the spiritual and practical challenges facing our generation. The same dynamics that led to the original scattering are still operating today, but so are the possibilities for integration and healing that were always part of the original design. Your role in this unfolding story depends on recognizing your inherited gifts, understanding their historical development, and choosing how to express them in service of humanity's highest potential. Because the ultimate secret hidden in these suppressed texts isn't just that we carry forward ancient capabilities, it's that we have the opportunity to use those capabilities in ways that transcend all previous limitations and fulfill the original purpose for which they were given. The brothers whose existence was hidden weren't just historical figures. They were archetypes of human potential that continue to express through their descendants. Understanding their story becomes the key to understanding your own purpose and the incredible possibilities that emerge when ancient gifts are used with wisdom rather than corrupted by fear. But to fully grasp the implications of this inheritance, we need to examine exactly how these bloodlines have influenced the development of major civilizations throughout recorded history. Because once you see those patterns, you'll understand that the conflicts and achievements that have shaped human development weren't random historical events. They were the inevitable result of inherited capabilities being expressed through individuals who made very different moral choices about how to use their gifts. The civilizations that emerged from these bloodlines weren't just different in their technologies and social structures. They represented fundamentally different approaches to the basic questions of human existence. How should power be organized? What is humanity's relationship to the natural world? What responsibilities do we have to each other and to future generations? The answers to these questions that were chosen by the original brothers continue to influence how their descendants approach these same fundamental issues today. Understanding those historical choices becomes crucial for understanding the options available to us now and the consequences that will flow from the decisions we make about how to use our inherited capabilities. Because the story isn't over. The bloodlines continue forward. The inherited gifts remain active, and the fundamental choices that shaped the original brothers' destinies are still being made by their descendants every single day. The only question is whether we'll learn from their mistakes or repeat them on an even larger scale with even more devastating consequences. The archaeological evidence shows us what happened when these capabilities were used without wisdom. The suppressed texts reveal the moral failures that led to their corruption. But the same sources also preserve hints about the original purpose these gifts were meant to serve and the incredible possibilities that emerge when they're used with proper understanding and ethical foundation. Those possibilities aren't just theoretical. They're beginning to manifest through individuals and communities that are choosing to integrate these ancient streams of consciousness in ways that transcend their historical limitations. People who are learning to combine technological mastery with ecological wisdom, information capabilities with spiritual insight, biological understanding with ethical responsibility. This integration isn't happening through genetic mixing alone. It's happening through conscious choice to embody the highest potential of all bloodline inheritances, while refusing to perpetuate their historical corruptions. And every individual who makes that choice contributes to healing the ancient separations and fulfilling the original purpose for which humanity received these extraordinary gifts. The question is whether you'll be part of that healing, or continue unconsciously perpetuating the patterns that have limited human potential for thousands of years. The choice is yours, but the consequences affect not just your individual destiny, but the trajectory of human evolution itself. The evidence becomes undeniable when you examine the rise and fall of ancient Egypt through this lens. The sudden appearance of sophisticated engineering capabilities that enabled the construction of monuments we still struggle to explain today. The mathematical precision embedded in pyramid alignments that demonstrate understanding of celestial mechanics spanning millennia. Most remarkably, the organizational systems that coordinated massive construction projects across generations without apparent developmental period. But here's what mainstream archaeology doesn't want you to understand. The technological capabilities that created these monuments weren't developed through gradual cultural evolution. They appeared fully formed because they were inherited knowledge being implemented by descendants who carried forward specific bloodline gifts from the original brothers. The acoustic properties built into pyramid chambers that induce altered states of consciousness. The electromagnetic anomalies detected within stone structures that affect human neural activity. The precise astronomical alignments that track stellar positions across precession cycles spanning thousands of years. These weren't accidents or lucky guesses. They were the deliberate application of inherited understanding that connected the builders to consciousness technologies preserved from humanity's earliest days. Yet alongside these incredible achievements, Egyptian civilization also demonstrates the moral corruptions that emerged when inherited power was used without wisdom. The extreme social hierarchies that concentrated wealth and knowledge in the hands of ruling elites. The systematic exploitation of human labor for monument construction. Most disturbing, the preservation techniques and burial practices that suggest understanding of biological processes being used to maintain control even beyond death. The pattern repeats across every major ancient civilization once you know what to look for. Sudden technological capabilities appearing without developmental history. Sophisticated understanding in specific areas combined with primitive limitations in others. Social structures that demonstrate advanced organizational consciousness alongside extreme moral failures. Consider the megalithic builders who left stone monuments across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Structures that demonstrate understanding of acoustic engineering, electromagnetic phenomena, and astronomical cycles that rival modern scientific knowledge. Yet these same civilizations practiced human sacrifice on scales that suggest biological knowledge being perverted for population control and psychological manipulation. The builders understood how to move stones weighing hundreds of tons with precision that modern equipment struggles to match. They positioned monuments at locations that formed geometric patterns across continental distances. They embedded mathematical relationships into their constructions that wouldn't be officially discovered until centuries later. But they also created altar systems designed for ritual killing and social structures based on fear and domination. The Mesopotamian civilizations reveal the same paradoxical combination of advanced knowledge and moral corruption. Cuneiform tablets describe technological processes that shouldn't have been possible given supposed historical limitations. Administrative systems that managed resources across vast territories, with efficiency that modern governments struggle to achieve. Legal codes that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of social psychology and behavioral modification. Yet these same civilizations developed warfare technologies that maximized human suffering, created social hierarchies based on systematic oppression, and established religious systems that used spiritual knowledge for population control rather than enlightenment. The inherited gifts were being expressed but corrupted by the moral choices of those who wielded them. The Greek civilization presents perhaps the clearest example of how bloodline inheritance influenced historical development. The sudden flowering of philosophical, mathematical, and scientific understanding that emerged seemingly from nowhere. The architectural achievements that demonstrate mastery of engineering principles, combined with aesthetic sensibilities that still influence design today. The political innovations that created new forms of social organization based on expanded concepts of human potential. But alongside these achievements, Greek civilization also demonstrates the characteristic corruptions that emerged when inherited capabilities were used without proper ethical foundation. The institution of slavery that provided the economic foundation for intellectual development, the military technologies that were used for conquest and exploitation rather than protection, the philosophical systems that justified social hierarchies and exclusion of entire populations from political participation. What becomes clear when you examine these patterns is that the bloodline inheritances carried forward both extraordinary capabilities and specific moral blind spots. Each lineage inherited not just technical knowledge, but psychological and spiritual orientations that influenced how that knowledge was applied. Some bloodlines were naturally inclined toward cooperation and service, while others carried tendencies toward domination and exploitation. This explains why certain civilizations consistently demonstrated particular combinations of achievements and failures. It wasn't random cultural development. It was the expression of inherited consciousness patterns being worked out through historical circumstances. But here's where this analysis becomes directly relevant to understanding our current global situation. The same bloodline inheritance patterns that shaped ancient civilizations continue to influence modern institutions and power structures. The regional concentrations of particular capabilities, the persistent cultural orientations, the recurring patterns of achievement and corruption, all of these reflect the ongoing expression of ancient inheritance streams. The technological innovation centers that drive modern development are located in regions that were historically associated with specific bloodlines. The financial systems that control global resources operate according to organizational principles that can be traced back to ancient inheritance patterns. The communication networks that shape information flow utilize technologies that represent democratized versions of capabilities once restricted to particular lineages. Most significantly, the moral blind spots that characterize modern institutions mirror the ethical failures that corrupted ancient bloodline expressions. The tendency to prioritize technological advancement over environmental sustainability. The use of information systems for manipulation rather than education. The application of biological knowledge for control rather than healing. These aren't coincidental similarities. They're the continued expression of inheritance patterns that were established thousands of years ago, but never properly integrated or healed. The same consciousness orientations that shaped ancient civilizations continue to influence how their modern descendants approach fundamental questions of power, responsibility, and purpose. Understanding this inheritance becomes crucial for anyone who wants to break free from these historical patterns rather than unconsciously perpetuate them. Because the capabilities are real, the inheritance is active. And the choices being made today will determine whether these ancient gifts finally fulfill their original purpose or continue to be corrupted by the same moral failures that have limited their expression throughout history. The democratization of inherited capabilities through modern technology creates unprecedented opportunities for integration and healing. For the first time since the original scattering, individuals from any bloodline background can potentially access and combine capabilities that were once separated among different lineages. Digital communication enables the kind of coordinated consciousness that was once restricted to the Star Walker's descendants. Industrial automation provides manufacturing capabilities that were once limited to Azrael's bloodline. Biotechnology offers biological manipulation tools that were once exclusive to the Lifekeeper's inheritance. But this democratization also amplifies the potential consequences of moral choices. The same technologies that could heal ancient separations can be used to create new forms of division and control. The capabilities that could liberate human potential can be perverted to establish unprecedented levels of surveillance and manipulation. The choice facing our generation is whether we'll use these democratized inheritances to repeat historical patterns of advancement, followed by corruption, or whether we'll learn from the mistakes of our ancestors and choose a different path. Whether we'll apply inherited capabilities for individual advantage or for serving humanity's collective evolution. This choice isn't abstract. It's being made right now through countless individual decisions about how to use technological capabilities, how to organize social and economic systems, how to approach the fundamental questions of human purpose and responsibility. Every choice to use inherited gifts for service, rather than domination, contributes to healing the ancient separations. Every decision to prioritize wisdom over power helps break the cycles that have limited human potential for millennia. But making these choices requires understanding the deeper dynamics at work. You can't transcend patterns you don't recognize. You can't choose a different path if you don't understand the inherited tendencies that influence your thinking and decision-making processes. This is where personal recognition of bloodline inheritance becomes transformational rather than just intellectually interesting. When you understand which ancient streams of consciousness flow through your particular genetic and spiritual lineage, you gain insight into both your greatest capabilities and your characteristic blind spots. You begin to recognize the inherited patterns that might otherwise control your choices unconsciously. Are you naturally drawn to technological systems and mechanical processes? You might be carrying forward aspects of Azrael's metallurgical inheritance, but you can choose to use those capabilities for creation and service rather than exploitation and domination. Do you find yourself understanding information patterns and communication dynamics intuitively? You could be connected to the Star Walker's consciousness technologies, but you can choose to apply those gifts for education and connection rather than manipulation and control. The key insight is that inheritance creates potential, not predestination. You're not bound to repeat the historical patterns of your bloodline. You can choose to embody the original purposes for which those capabilities were given, while learning from the failures that led to their corruption. But individual transformation alone isn't sufficient to heal these ancient patterns. The original design required cooperation between bloodlines, each contributing their specific gifts to create integrated solutions that transcended the limitations of any single inheritance. That cooperation was broken by fear, competition, and the desire for individual advantage. Healing requires choosing collaboration over conflict, integration over separation, collective service over personal advancement. This healing is already beginning to manifest through individuals and communities that recognize inherited gifts but refuse to use them selfishly. People who understand that their capabilities were never meant for personal glorification, but for contributing to humanity's collective awakening. Organizations that are learning to integrate different forms of knowledge and consciousness in ways that transcend the historical limitations of any single tradition or bloodline. The emergence of interdisciplinary approaches that combine technological innovation with ecological wisdom. The development of communication systems that prioritize authentic connection over information control. The application of biological understanding for healing and enhancement rather than manipulation and exploitation. These represent the beginning of the integration that was always the ultimate purpose of the scattered inheritances. But this integration faces resistance from institutional structures and consciousness patterns that benefit from maintaining the ancient separations. Financial systems that profit from scarcity and competition rather than abundance and cooperation. Political structures that maintain power through division rather than unity. Educational systems that fragment knowledge rather than revealing the underlying connections between different fields of understanding. These institutional resistances aren't just external obstacles, they're supported by psychological patterns within individuals who have been conditioned to think in terms of competition rather than collaboration, scarcity rather than abundance, separation rather than connection. Breaking free from these patterns requires both individual transformation and collective action to create new structures that support integrated expression of inherited capabilities. The ancient texts that preserve fragments of this hidden history weren't just recording past events. They were preserving a template for future integration. The descriptions of cooperation between different bloodline capabilities, the visions of unified human potential, the prophecies of restored harmony between humanity and the natural world, all of these point toward possibilities that become available when inherited gifts are used with wisdom rather than corrupted by fear. These possibilities aren't just spiritual ideals, they're practical potentials that emerge naturally when individuals choose to transcend their bloodline limitations and work together to create solutions that serve collective rather than individual interests. The technological capabilities exist to solve most of humanity's practical challenges. The knowledge exists to heal most of our social and environmental problems. What's missing is the consciousness integration that would enable these capabilities to be applied wisely rather than destructively. This consciousness integration is the real work of our generation, not just developing new technologies or accumulating more information, but learning to use inherited capabilities in ways that serve life rather than death, connection rather than separation, wisdom rather than mere cleverness. The story of the hidden brothers whose existence was suppressed isn't just ancient history. It's the template for understanding the spiritual dynamics that continue to shape human development today. The conflicts between different approaches to power and responsibility. The tension between individual advancement and collective service. The choice between using inherited gifts for domination or liberation. All of these reflect the ongoing expression of consciousness patterns that were established in humanity's earliest days. Understanding this template becomes crucial for navigating the challenges and opportunities of our current historical moment. Because the choices being made today about how to use technological capabilities, how to organize social systems, how to approach fundamental questions of human purpose and responsibility, these choices will determine whether inherited gifts finally fulfill their original purpose or continue to be limited by the same moral failures that have characterized their expression throughout history. The bloodlines continue forward, the inheritances remain active, and the fundamental spiritual dynamics established by the original brothers are still playing out through their descendants. The only question is whether we'll learn from their mistakes and choose a different path, or repeat their failures on an even larger scale with even more devastating consequences. But there's also unprecedented opportunity. The democratization of inherited capabilities through modern technology, the growing recognition of the need for integrated approaches to complex challenges, the emergence of individuals and communities committed to using their gifts for collective service rather than personal advantage. All of these suggest that the healing and integration that was always the ultimate purpose of the scattered inheritances may finally be possible. The choice is ours. But the consequences affect not just our individual destinies, but the trajectory of human evolution itself. Understanding the hidden history of these bloodline inheritances becomes the key to making that choice consciously, rather than unconsciously repeating patterns that have limited human potential for thousands of years. Because the ultimate secret preserved in these suppressed texts isn't just that we carry forward extraordinary capabilities inherited from humanity's founding families. It's that we have the opportunity to use those capabilities in ways that transcend all previous limitations and fulfill the original purpose for which they were given. The purpose of creating a civilization that serves life rather than death, connection rather than separation, wisdom rather than mere power. That civilization isn't just a future possibility. It's beginning to emerge right now through individuals who choose to embody the highest potential of their inherited gifts while working together to create something greater than any individual bloodline could achieve alone. The question is whether you'll be part of that emergence or continue unconsciously perpetuating the patterns that have prevented it from manifesting throughout history. The bloodlines of the hidden brothers aren't just genetic inheritances. They're streams of consciousness that continue to flow through individuals who choose to align themselves with their highest expression. Understanding which streams flow through you becomes the key to understanding your role in humanity's ultimate destiny. But that understanding requires more than just intellectual analysis. It requires recognition of the spiritual dynamics that continue to shape how these inheritances express through modern individuals and institutions. Because the same moral choices that determined the fate of the original brothers continue to determine how their inherited gifts manifest through their descendants today. The recognition process isn't something you can force through intellectual analysis alone. It emerges through paying attention to the patterns that have shaped your life from the earliest memories you can access. What drew your attention as a child before social conditioning told you what was supposed to be interesting? What activities made you lose track of time completely? What subjects did you understand intuitively while others struggled to grasp even basic concepts? These aren't random personality quirks or coincidental interests. They're expressions of inherited consciousness attempting to manifest through your individual awareness. The bloodline gifts don't lie dormant, waiting for activation. They've been trying to express through you your entire life, but most people learn to ignore or suppress them because they don't fit conventional expectations about what's normal or acceptable. Consider the child who instinctively understands how machines work without formal training, who takes apart devices just to see their internal structure and somehow knows how to put them back together better than before. This isn't just natural curiosity. It's Azrael's metallurgical inheritance attempting to express through a modern descendant who carries those genetic and spiritual markers. Or think about individuals who seem to know things before they happen, who can sense patterns in human behavior that others miss completely, who understand information systems and communication dynamics at levels that can't be explained through conventional education. These capabilities point toward connection with the Starwalker's consciousness technologies, inherited understanding that transcends normal sensory limitations. Then there are people who have unusual sensitivity to biological processes, who can sense illness or health in others without medical training, who understand plant and animal behavior in ways that seem almost telepathic, who can create abundance from seemingly barren conditions through methods they can't fully explain. These individuals carry forward aspects of the Lifekeeper's biological mastery, inherited knowledge that operates below the threshold of conscious awareness. But here's what makes this recognition process so crucial for understanding your personal destiny. These inherited capabilities aren't just interesting talents or unusual abilities. They're clues to the specific role you were meant to play in humanity's collective evolution. The particular combination of bloodline inheritances you carry determines not just what you're capable of accomplishing, but what you're spiritually responsible for contributing to the healing and integration process. The suppressed texts describe the original purpose of these scattered gifts in terms that become startling when you realize their contemporary relevance. Each bloodline was intended to develop their specific capabilities to a level where they could contribute to what the texts call the great work, the transformation of human civilization from its current state of competition and conflict into something that serves life itself. Azrael's descendants were meant to develop technologies that worked with natural systems rather than against them, manufacturing processes that enhanced rather than depleted environmental resources, organizational structures that empowered rather than exploited human potential. The metallurgical knowledge was never supposed to be used for weapons of destruction. It was meant to create tools for construction and healing. The Starwalkers' lineage carried responsibility for developing communication and consciousness technologies that connected rather than divided human communities. The astronomical knowledge wasn't meant for predicting and manipulating human behavior. It was intended to help humanity understand its place within cosmic cycles and align civilizational development with natural evolutionary processes. The Lifekeeper's bloodline was tasked with maintaining the biological integrity and vitality of all living systems, developing agricultural and healing methods that enhanced rather than diminished the life force flowing through ecological networks. The biological understanding wasn't supposed to be used for creating dependencies and control mechanisms. It was meant to ensure abundance and health for all forms of life. When you recognize which of these responsibility streams flows through your particular inheritance, you begin to understand not just your capabilities but your spiritual obligations. You're not just randomly gifted with unusual abilities. You're carrying forward specific aspects of humanity's original purpose that were scattered when the brothers chose individual advantage over collective service. This recognition often comes with a sense of both excitement and overwhelming responsibility. Excitement because you finally understand why certain activities energize you while others drain your vitality completely. Why some forms of knowledge seem to download directly into your consciousness while other subjects remain permanently opaque. Why you feel drawn towards specific types of service that others find boring or impossible. But also overwhelming responsibility because you realize that your individual choices about how to use these inherited gifts affect not just your personal destiny, but the healing of ancient wounds that have limited human potential for thousands of years. Every time you choose to use your capabilities for selfish purposes, you perpetuate the historical patterns that led to the original corruption. Every time you choose service over self-interest, you contribute to the integration that was always the ultimate purpose. This responsibility becomes even more intense when you realize that the current historical moment represents a unique convergence of circumstances that may not repeat for thousands of years. The democratization of inherited capabilities through modern technology means that individuals from any bloodline background can now access tools and knowledge that were once restricted to specific genetic lineages. But this democratization also means that the consequences of moral choices are amplified far beyond anything previous generations faced. A single individual with access to modern communication technology can influence the consciousness of millions of people within hours. Someone with basic biotechnology tools can create biological agents that affect entire populations. Anyone with sufficient technological resources can implement surveillance and control systems that would have been impossible for ancient empires to imagine. The same capabilities that could finally enable the integration and healing of scattered bloodline gifts can also be used to create forms of separation and control that make historical tyrannies look primitive by comparison. The choice between these outcomes depends on whether individuals recognize their inherited responsibilities and choose to fulfill them, or continue unconsciously repeating the patterns that have prevented integration throughout history. But here's what makes this moment particularly hopeful, despite the obvious dangers. The consciousness evolution that's happening within individuals who are awakening to their bloodline inheritance is also creating new forms of cooperation and coordination that transcend historical limitations. People are beginning to recognize that their individual gifts are most powerful when combined with complementary capabilities carried by others from different inheritance streams. The technological innovators, who understand that their capabilities are meant to serve life rather than profit. The consciousness researchers who recognize that information systems should connect rather than manipulate human awareness. The biological healers who see that their knowledge is meant to enhance rather than control natural processes. When individuals carrying these different inheritance streams choose to work together, they create possibilities that exceed anything any single bloodline could achieve in isolation. This cooperation isn't happening through formal organizations or institutional structures. It's emerging organically through individuals who recognize their spiritual kinship despite genetic and cultural differences. People who understand that their inherited gifts were never meant for personal advancement, but for serving something greater than individual interest. The recognition process often begins with individuals feeling inexplicably drawn to others who carry complementary capabilities. Technological innovators finding themselves attracted to consciousness researchers. Agricultural healers connecting with communication specialists. Metallurgical craftspeople collaborating with biological scientists. These attractions aren't random. They're expressions of inherited consciousness, recognizing the other streams needed for integration. But this organic cooperation faces systematic resistance from institutional structures that benefit from maintaining the ancient separations. Educational systems that fragment knowledge into isolated specializations. Economic structures that reward competition over collaboration. Political organizations that maintain power through division rather than unity. Religious institutions that claim exclusive access to spiritual truth, rather than recognizing the validity of different inheritance streams. Breaking through this institutional resistance requires more than just individual recognition of bloodline gifts. It requires collective action to create new structures that support integrated expression of inherited capabilities. Alternative educational approaches that reveal connections between different fields of knowledge. Economic models based on abundance and cooperation rather than scarcity and competition. Political systems that empower rather than control human potential. These alternative structures are already beginning to emerge in forms that most people don't recognize as connected to ancient bloodline healing. Permaculture projects that integrate technological innovation with ecological wisdom. Open source technology initiatives that prioritize shared knowledge over proprietary control. Consciousness research networks that combine scientific methodology with spiritual insight. Holistic healing communities that address biological, psychological, and spiritual dimensions simultaneously. Each of these emerging structures represents a fragment of the integrated civilization that becomes possible when bloodline gifts are used according to their original purpose, rather than corrupted by fear and competition. But achieving full integration requires conscious recognition of the deeper dynamics at work, an intentional choice to support healing rather than perpetuating historical patterns. This is where your personal recognition of bloodline inheritance becomes more than just interesting self-knowledge. It becomes a spiritual calling to participate consciously in humanity's collective evolution. Because once you understand which ancient streams of consciousness flow through your particular genetic and spiritual lineage, you also understand your specific responsibility for contributing to the healing process. That responsibility isn't abstract. It manifests through concrete choices about how to use your time, energy, and resources, whether to pursue career paths that serve life or merely generate personal income, whether to develop your capabilities for individual advantage or collective benefit, whether to support institutional structures that maintain separation or invest in alternatives that enable integration. These choices become the practical expression of your spiritual inheritance. The daily decisions through which ancient gifts either fulfill their original purpose or continue to be limited by the same moral failures that have characterized their expression throughout history. Every choice to use inherited capabilities for service rather than selfishness contributes to healing the wounds that have prevented integration for thousands of years. The ancient texts describe the ultimate outcome of this healing process in terms that sound mythological until you realize they're describing practical possibilities that emerge when inherited. Gifts are integrated rather than separated. Technological capabilities that enhance rather than exploit natural systems. Communication networks that connect rather than manipulate human consciousness. Biological understanding that creates abundance rather than scarcity. Social structures that empower rather than control human potential. These aren't impossible dreams. They're the natural result of using inherited capabilities according to their original design rather than corrupting them through fear and competition. The knowledge exists, the technology is available, and individuals are awakening to their responsibilities. What's missing is sufficient collective commitment to choose integration over separation, cooperation over competition, service over self-interest. But that collective commitment emerges through individual recognition and choice. Every person who awakens to their bloodline inheritance and chooses to use their gifts responsibly contributes to reaching the tipping point where integration becomes inevitable rather than just possible. Every individual who breaks free from historical patterns and chooses a different path makes it easier for others to make similar choices. The story of the hidden brothers whose existence was suppressed isn't just ancient history. It's the template for understanding the spiritual evolution that's happening right now through their descendants. The same consciousness streams that were scattered thousands of years ago are beginning to reunite through individuals who choose to transcend the limitations and corruptions that have characterized their historical expression. Understanding this process becomes crucial for anyone who wants to participate consciously rather than unconsciously in humanity's collective destiny. Because the choices being made today about how to use inherited capabilities will determine whether ancient gifts finally fulfill their original purpose or continue to be limited by the same moral failures that have prevented their integration throughout history. The bloodlines continue forward, the inheritances remain active, and the fundamental spiritual dynamics established by the original brothers are still determining how those gifts manifest through modern individuals and institutions. The only question is whether we'll learn from their mistakes and choose a different path, or repeat their failures with consequences that could prevent integration for another 1,000 years. But there's also unprecedented opportunity. The convergence of inherited capabilities through modern technology, the growing recognition of the need for integrated solutions to complex challenges, the emergence of individuals committed to using their gifts for collective service rather than personal advantage, all of these suggest that the healing and integration that was always the ultimate purpose may finally be within reach. The choice facing each individual who recognizes their bloodline inheritance is whether to use that recognition for personal empowerment or collective healing, whether to pursue individual advancement or contribute to the integration that could transform human civilization, whether to perpetuate the patterns that have limited human potential for thousands of years, or break free from those patterns and help create something entirely new. Because the ultimate secret, preserved in the suppressed texts, isn't just that extraordinary capabilities were distributed among humanity's founding families. It's that those capabilities were always meant to work together to create a form of civilization that serves life rather than death, connection rather than separation, wisdom rather than mere power. A civilization that honors the sacred rather than exploiting it for temporary advantage. That civilization isn't just a future possibility. It's beginning to manifest right now through individuals who choose to embody the highest potential of their inherited gifts while working together to heal the ancient separations. But its full emergence depends on enough people recognizing their bloodline inheritance and choosing to use that knowledge for collective rather than individual benefit. The question is whether you'll be part of that emergence or continue unconsciously perpetuating the patterns that have prevented it from manifesting throughout history. Because your choice doesn't just affect your personal destiny, it affects the trajectory of human evolution itself and determines whether the scattered gifts of the hidden brothers finally fulfill their original purpose or remain fragmented for another age. The recognition of your specific bloodline inheritance is just the beginning. What matters is what you choose to do with that recognition and whether you'll use your inherited gifts to serve something greater than your individual interests. Because that choice determines not just your spiritual development, but your contribution to healing wounds that have limited human potential since the very beginning of recorded history. The awakening to your bloodline inheritance often triggers what ancient texts describe as the convergence phenomenon. This isn't just intellectual understanding of your capabilities. It's a fundamental shift in consciousness that alters how you perceive reality itself. Suddenly, patterns become visible that were always present but remained hidden beneath the surface of ordinary awareness. You begin noticing synchronicities that seem too precise to be coincidental. Information appears exactly when you need it most. People carrying complementary gifts seem to materialize in your life without apparent effort on your part. Opportunities emerge that align perfectly with your inherited capabilities, but challenge you to use them in ways that serve collective rather than individual interests. This convergence process often feels overwhelming because it demands rapid evolution beyond the comfort zones that most people spend their entire lives constructing. The inherited gifts don't activate gradually through gentle progression. They emerge suddenly with intensity that can shatter previous assumptions about what's possible or acceptable within conventional social structures. Consider what happens when someone carrying Azrael's metallurgical inheritance suddenly begins understanding technological systems at levels that transcend their formal education. They don't just grasp how machines work, they perceive the underlying principles that govern all technological processes. They begin seeing connections between different systems that engineers with decades of experience miss completely. But this expanded awareness comes with responsibility that can feel crushing. They realize that most modern technology is being developed and implemented in ways that violate the fundamental principles their inheritance helps them perceive. Manufacturing processes that create more problems than they solve. Communication systems designed for manipulation rather than connection. Transportation networks that fragment communities rather than strengthening them. The same pattern manifests for individuals awakening to the Star Walker's consciousness technologies. They don't just become better at processing information or understanding communication dynamics. They begin perceiving the underlying structures that shape human awareness itself. They recognize how information systems influence collective consciousness in ways that most people never suspect. This recognition often brings profound distress because they see how communication technologies that could liberate human potential are being systematically perverted for control and manipulation. Social media platforms designed to fragment attention rather than enhance connection. Educational systems that discourage independent thinking rather than developing intellectual capabilities. Entertainment networks that numb consciousness rather than expanding awareness. For those carrying the Lifekeeper's biological inheritance, the awakening process reveals the extent to which modern civilization has divorced itself from natural systems. They don't just become more sensitive to environmental conditions or better at understanding health and healing. They begin perceiving the life force that flows through all biological networks and recognizing how human activities either enhance or diminish that vital energy. This awareness often creates overwhelming grief because they see how agricultural systems deplete rather than regenerate soil fertility, how medical approaches suppress symptoms rather than addressing underlying causes of illness, how urban development destroys rather than integrates with natural ecosystems. how food production creates scarcity rather than abundance through methods that violate basic principles of biological harmony. The convergence phenomenon doesn't just affect individuals in isolation. It creates what the ancient texts describe as resonance fields, areas of influence where awakened consciousness begins affecting others who carry similar or complementary inheritances. These fields operate below the threshold of ordinary awareness, but create measurable changes in how people think, feel, and make decisions within their sphere of influence. But as someone awakening to technological inheritance doesn't just develop better engineering capabilities. Their presence begins inspiring others to think more creatively about technological solutions. Their projects start attracting collaborators who bring exactly the skills needed to implement innovations that serve life rather than profit. Their work environment gradually shifts toward approaches that honor both efficiency and ecological responsibility. The same pattern manifests around individuals awakening to consciousness technologies. They don't just become better teachers or communicators. Their presence creates spaces where authentic learning and genuine connection become possible. People around them begin experiencing expanded awareness and deeper understanding. Information begins flowing more freely and accurately within their networks. Those embodying biological inheritance don't just become better healers or agricultural practitioners. Their presence begins affecting the health and vitality of everyone in their environment. Plants grow better around them. Animals become calmer and more responsive. People experience improved health and increased energy without understanding why these changes are occurring. But these resonance fields also attract resistance from institutional structures and individuals whose power depends on maintaining the separations that prevent integration. The same capabilities that could transform human civilization also threaten existing systems of control and exploitation. This creates what the texts describe as convergence conflicts, situations where awakened individuals find themselves confronting forces that will do anything to prevent their gifts from manifesting fully. These conflicts aren't just external opposition from threatened institutions. They manifest as internal struggles between inherited capabilities, seeking expression, and psychological patterns conditioned to maintain limitation and separation. The bloodline gifts create pressure for expansion, while social conditioning creates resistance to change. This tension can generate psychological stress that feels almost unbearable until individuals learn to navigate the convergence process consciously. The ancient texts provide detailed guidance for managing these convergence conflicts, but most of this information was systematically removed from accessible sources because it would have enabled too many people to activate their inherited gifts simultaneously. The fragments that survive suggest specific practices for accelerating integration while minimizing psychological disruption. Physical practices that help the nervous system adapt to expanded awareness, breathing techniques that facilitate the flow of inherited consciousness through modern physiology, meditation methods specifically designed for different bloodline inheritances, dietary approaches that support the biological changes that accompany spiritual awakening. But the most crucial guidance involves learning to distinguish between authentic inherited gifts and psychological inflation that mimics awakening while actually preventing genuine development. The convergence process can trigger ego responses that create grandiose fantasies about personal importance rather than humble recognition of responsibility for collective service. True bloodline awakening generates humility because it reveals the magnitude of what needs to be healed and the complexity of what needs to be integrated. It creates determination to develop capabilities in service of something greater than individual advancement. It inspires collaboration with others, carrying complementary gifts rather than competition for recognition or resources. False awakening generates arrogance because it focuses on personal specialness rather than collective responsibility. It creates desire to use inherited gifts for individual advantage rather than common benefit. It promotes separation from others rather than recognition of interdependence and mutual support. The difference between authentic and false awakening becomes crucial because the convergence process amplifies whatever motivations drive individual choices. Someone awakening to technological inheritance with authentic motivation develops innovations that serve life and enhance human potential. Someone with false motivation uses the same capabilities to create technologies that increase personal power and control over others. This amplification effect explains why the ancient texts place such emphasis on moral preparation before capability development. The brothers who fell into corruption weren't lacking in inherited gifts. They possessed extraordinary capabilities, but used them according to motivations that served ego rather than spirit, individual advantage rather than collective evolution. The same dynamic operates today through individuals who recognize their bloodline inheritance but choose to use that recognition for personal empowerment rather than collective healing. They develop impressive capabilities but apply them in ways that perpetuate separation rather than promoting integration. They become part of the problem rather than contributing to solutions. But authentic awakening creates possibilities that transcend anything achieved through individual development alone. When people carrying different bloodline inheritances choose to collaborate rather than compete, they generate collective capabilities that exceed the sum of their individual gifts. The technological innovator working with the consciousness researcher and the biological healer can develop solutions that none of them could create in isolation. These collaborative relationships often emerge spontaneously through the resonance fields generated by authentic awakening. People find themselves drawn to others whose capabilities complement their own inherited gifts. Projects emerge that combine different forms of knowledge in ways that create breakthrough innovations. Communities form around shared commitment to using inherited gifts for collective service rather than individual advancement. The ancient texts describe these collaborative relationships as the foundation for what they call the restoration process, the gradual healing of separations that have prevented integration throughout recorded history. Each successful collaboration between different bloodline inheritances creates a template that makes similar cooperation easier for others to achieve. But the restoration process faces systematic opposition from institutional structures that benefit from maintaining fragmentation and competition. Educational systems that discourage interdisciplinary thinking, economic models that reward individual achievement over collaborative innovation, political structures that maintain power through division rather than unity. Breaking through this institutional resistance requires more than just individual awakening and small-scale collaboration. It demands collective action to create alternative structures that support integrated expression of bloodline gifts. New forms of education that reveal connections between different fields of knowledge. Economic models based on abundance and cooperation, rather than scarcity and competition. Social organizations that empower rather than control human potential. These alternative structures are already emerging in forms that most people don't recognize as connected to bloodline awakening and integration processes. But they represent fragments of the civilization that becomes possible when inherited gifts are used according to their original purpose, rather than corrupted by fear and competition. Permaculture communities that integrate technological innovation with ecological wisdom. Open source projects that prioritize shared knowledge over proprietary control. Consciousness research networks that combine scientific methodology with spiritual insight. Holistic healing centers that address biological, psychological, and spiritual dimensions simultaneously. Each of these emerging structures demonstrates aspects of what becomes possible when bloodline inheritances are integrated rather than separated. But achieving full restoration requires conscious recognition of the deeper dynamics at work and intentional commitment to support healing, rather than perpetuating historical patterns of fragmentation. This commitment must manifest through concrete choices about how to invest time, energy, and resources whether to support educational approaches that fragment knowledge or alternatives that reveal underlying connections, whether to participate in economic systems based on competition and exploitation or invest in models that prioritize cooperation and regeneration, whether to engage with political structures that maintain division or work toward organizations that empower collective potential. These choices become the practical expression of bloodline awakening, the daily decisions through which inherited gifts either fulfill their original purpose or continue to be limited by the same moral failures that have characterized their expression throughout history. Every choice to use capabilities for service rather than selfishness contributes to healing wounds that have prevented integration for thousands of years. The restoration process isn't just about healing ancient separations. It's about creating new possibilities that transcend anything achieved in previous historical periods. The combination of inherited capabilities with modern technological resources creates potential for innovations that could transform human civilization in ways that serve all life rather than just human interests. Technological systems that enhance rather than exploit natural processes. Communication networks that expand rather than manipulate human consciousness. Agricultural methods that regenerate rather than deplete ecological systems. Social structures that develop rather than suppress human potential. These possibilities aren't utopian fantasies. They're practical potentials that emerge naturally when inherited gifts are integrated and applied according to their original design. The knowledge exists, the capabilities are available, and individuals are awakening to their responsibilities. What determines whether these possibilities manifest is the collective commitment to choose integration over separation, cooperation over competition, service over self-interest. But that collective commitment emerges through individual recognition and choice. Every person who awakens to their bloodline inheritance and chooses to use their gifts responsibly contributes to reaching the tipping point where restoration becomes inevitable rather than just possible. Every individual who breaks free from historical patterns makes it easier for others to make similar choices. The convergence phenomenon creates momentum that accelerates as more people participate consciously rather than unconsciously in the awakening process. Each authentic collaboration between different bloodline inheritances makes similar cooperation more likely for others. Each successful integration of scattered gifts creates templates that others can follow and improve upon. This momentum explains why the ancient texts describe the restoration process as inevitable once sufficient individuals choose to participate. Not because it's predetermined, but because authentic awakening creates conditions that make continued separation increasingly difficult to maintain. The resonance fields generated by integrated consciousness gradually transform the entire environment in ways that support further awakening and integration. But reaching the tipping point requires conscious participation by individuals who recognize their bloodline inheritance and choose to use that recognition for collective rather than personal benefit. It demands willingness to transcend comfort zones and social expectations in order to fulfill responsibilities that extend far beyond individual interests. The question facing anyone who recognizes their inherited gifts is whether they'll choose authentic awakening that serves collective evolution or false awakening that perpetuates historical patterns of separation and competition. Whether they'll use their capabilities to heal ancient wounds or continue inflicting new versions of the same injuries. Because the convergence process amplifies whatever motivations drive individual choices. Authentic motivation creates possibilities for healing and integration that benefit all life. False motivation generates capabilities that serve ego and separation while appearing to offer solutions. The difference between these outcomes depends on recognizing that bloodline inheritance isn't about personal specialness or individual superiority. It's about carrying forward specific responsibilities for contributing to humanity's collective evolution. The gifts were never meant for personal advancement. They were distributed among different lineages so that cooperation would be necessary for their full expression. Understanding this cooperative requirement becomes crucial for anyone seeking to participate authentically in the restoration process. Because the ultimate purpose isn't just healing ancient separations, it's creating integrated civilization that transcends all previous limitations and serves the highest potential of life itself. That civilization emerges through individuals who choose to embody the best possibilities of their inherited gifts while working together to create something greater than any single bloodline could achieve alone. But its manifestation depends on sufficient people making that choice consciously rather than unconsciously, perpetuating the patterns that have prevented integration throughout recorded history. The ancient texts preserved in fragments across multiple traditions all point toward the same ultimate outcome. The scattered gifts of the hidden brothers will eventually reunite through their descendants, who choose cooperation over competition, integration over separation, service over selfishness. But the timing of that reunion depends on how quickly individuals awaken to their inheritance and choose to use it responsibly. The convergence is accelerating. The resonance fields are expanding. The collaborative relationships are forming. The alternative structures are emerging. But reaching the tipping point requires conscious participation by those who carry the most powerful inherited capabilities and the greatest responsibility for their proper use. Are you ready to recognize which ancient streams of consciousness flow through your particular genetic and spiritual lineage? Are you prepared to take responsibility for using those gifts in service of collective evolution rather than individual advancement? Are you willing to transcend the limitations and corruptions that have characterized your bloodline's historical expression? Because these aren't just philosophical questions. They're practical choices that determine not just your personal destiny, but your contribution to healing wounds that have limited human potential since the very beginning of recorded history. The bloodlines continue forward, the inheritances remain active, and the fundamental spiritual dynamics established by the original brothers are still determining how those gifts manifest through modern individuals and institutions. The only question is whether we'll learn from their mistakes and choose a different path, or repeat their failures with consequences that could prevent integration for another 1,000 years. But there's also unprecedented opportunity for those who choose consciously to participate in the restoration process that was always the ultimate purpose of the scattered inheritances. The hidden brothers whose stories were suppressed weren't just historical figures. They were archetypes of human potential that continue to express through descendants who choose to embody their highest possibilities. Understanding their legacy becomes the key to understanding your own purpose and the incredible opportunities that emerge when ancient gifts are finally used according to their original design. But that understanding requires more than intellectual analysis. It demands recognition of the spiritual dynamics that continue to shape how these inheritances express through modern life and the moral choices that determine whether they serve creation or destruction, healing or harm, integration or continued separation. The restoration process has begun. The question is whether you'll participate consciously in its unfolding or remain unconscious of the forces that are already transforming human civilization in ways that most people don't yet recognize, but will become undeniable as the convergence accelerates toward its ultimate conclusion. The time has come to ask yourself the most important question of your entire existence. After everything we've uncovered, after all the evidence we've examined, after understanding the suppressed history that has been hidden from humanity for thousands of years, what will you do with this knowledge? Because here's the truth that changes everything. You're not just a passive observer of this ancient story. You're not just someone who happened to stumble across information about forgotten bloodlines and hidden brothers. You are an active participant in a cosmic drama that began before recorded history and continues to unfold through every choice you make today. The convergence isn't some distant future event. It's happening right now, in this moment, as you process these revelations and decide how they will change the way you live your life. The restoration process isn't waiting for permission from institutions or approval from authorities. It's emerging through individuals who recognize their inherited gifts and choose to use them for something greater than personal advancement. Every person watching this investigation carries genetic and spiritual markers that connect them to one or more of these ancient streams of consciousness. The technological innovators, the consciousness researchers, the biological healers, the acoustic engineers, the electromagnetic specialists, the hydrological masters, the gravitational manipulators. These aren't just historical categories. They're living inheritances that continue to express through modern descendants who choose to awaken to their true potential. But awakening comes with responsibility that most people aren't prepared to accept. It means recognizing that your natural abilities, your unexplained interests, your intuitive understanding of certain systems, all of these connect you to ancient streams of knowledge that were meant to serve collective evolution rather than individual success. It means understanding that the challenges facing our world today, the environmental crises, the social conflicts, the technological dangers, all of these are symptoms of the same fundamental problem that led to the original scattering. The use of inherited gifts for competition rather than cooperation, for domination rather than service, for separation rather than integration. And it means choosing to break free from the patterns that have limited human potential for thousands of years by using your capabilities in ways that heal rather than harm, that connect rather than divide, that serve life rather than death. This choice isn't theoretical. It manifests through concrete decisions about how you spend your time, where you focus your energy, what projects you support, which relationships you cultivate, how you respond to the opportunities and challenges that emerge in your daily experience. Do you pursue career paths that maximize personal income? Or do you seek work that contributes to collective healing? Do you develop your talents for individual recognition? Or do you cultivate capabilities that serve something greater than yourself? Do you compete with others who carry complementary gifts? Or do you collaborate to create solutions that transcend what any individual could achieve alone? These daily choices become the practical expression of your spiritual inheritance, the mechanism through which ancient gifts either fulfill their original purpose or continue to be corrupted by the same moral failures that have characterized their expression throughout history. But here's what makes this moment uniquely powerful. The democratization of inherited capabilities through modern technology means that the integration process no longer depends on genetic bloodlines alone. Anyone who chooses to align themselves with the highest expression of these ancient gifts can participate in the restoration, regardless of their specific genetic inheritance. The technological tools exist to heal environmental damage. The communication systems exist to connect human consciousness across all artificial boundaries. The biological knowledge exists to create abundance rather than scarcity. The consciousness technologies exist to expand awareness beyond the limitations that have trapped humanity in cycles of conflict and suffering. What's missing isn't capability or knowledge. What's missing is sufficient commitment to use these tools according to their original design rather than corrupting them for temporary advantage. The ancient texts describe this moment as the time of choosing, when the scattered inheritances either reunite through conscious cooperation or fragment further through continued competition. When humanity either transcends its historical limitations or repeats them on a scale that could prevent integration for another age. You are living at the exact fulcrum point of that choice. Your individual decisions about how to use your inherited gifts contribute to determining which outcome manifests. Every choice to serve rather than exploit, to cooperate rather than compete, to integrate rather than separate, moves the collective trajectory toward healing and restoration. But every choice to use capabilities for personal advancement rather than collective benefit perpetuates the patterns that have prevented integration throughout recorded history. Every decision to compete rather than collaborate reinforces the separations that keep ancient gifts fragmented and limited. The responsibility is both individual and collective. You cannot heal these ancient wounds alone, but the healing cannot happen without your conscious participation. The restoration requires collaboration between individuals carrying different inherited gifts, but it also demands that each person take full responsibility for their particular contribution to the process. This is why understanding your specific bloodline inheritance becomes so crucial. Not because it makes you special or superior, but because it helps you recognize the unique ways you're capable of contributing to collective healing. The particular combination of ancient streams that flow through your consciousness determines both your greatest capabilities and your most important responsibilities. Are you called to develop technologies that serve life rather than profit? Are you meant to create communication systems that expand rather than manipulate human awareness? Are you destined to apply biological understanding for healing rather than control? Are you supposed to use consciousness technologies for liberation rather than domination? The calling isn't always obvious or comfortable. It often requires abandoning conventional paths to success in order to pursue purposes that serve collective evolution rather than individual advancement. It demands courage to use inherited gifts in ways that challenge existing systems rather than conforming to established expectations. But the rewards transcend anything that individual achievement could provide. The deep satisfaction of using capabilities according to their original design. The profound connection that emerges through authentic collaboration with others, carrying complementary gifts. The transformational impact of contributing to healing wounds that have limited human potential for millennia. Most importantly, the knowledge that you participated consciously in humanity's greatest evolutionary leap, rather than remaining unconscious of the forces that are already transforming civilization in ways that will become undeniable as the convergence accelerates. The hidden brothers, whose stories were suppressed, weren't just ancient figures. They were archetypes of human potential that continue to express through descendants who choose to embody their highest possibilities. Understanding their legacy isn't just intellectual curiosity. It's the key to understanding your role in the cosmic drama that continues to unfold through your life and choices. The bloodlines continue forward. The inheritances remain active. The convergence accelerates. The restoration begins. The only question is whether you'll participate consciously or unconsciously in the unfolding of humanity's ultimate destiny. Because the story of Cain and Abel's secret half-brothers isn't finished. It's still being written through every individual who chooses to awaken to their inherited gifts and use them in service of something greater than personal interest, through every collaboration between different bloodline capabilities, through every innovation that serves life rather than death, through every choice to heal rather than harm. You are part of this story whether you recognize it or not. The question is whether you'll play your role consciously, understanding the deeper significance of your choices and their impact on collective evolution, or remain unconscious of the ancient dynamics that continue to shape human development through your daily decisions. The convergence cannot be stopped. The restoration will continue. The integration of scattered gifts will eventually occur. But the timing and the form it takes depend on how many individuals choose to participate consciously rather than unconsciously in the process. If this investigation has awakened something within you, if you recognize aspects of your own inheritance in these ancient streams of consciousness, if you feel called to use your capabilities for collective healing rather than individual advancement, then you understand what must be done. The time for hiding is over. The age of separation is ending. The restoration has begun, and you, carrying forward the blood and spirit of humanity's founding families, have the opportunity to help write the final chapters of the greatest story ever told. The question is no longer who were Cain and Abel's secret half-brothers. The question is, what will you do with the inheritance they left you, and how will you use it to serve the healing and integration that was always the ultimate purpose of their scattered gifts. The choice is yours, but the consequences affect not just your individual destiny, but the trajectory of human evolution itself. Choose wisely. Choose consciously. Choose in service of life, because the hidden brothers are no longer hidden. They live on through you.